everyone. Welcome to Crime in Court. This is the 1996 Menendez brothers trial, California versus Erik and Lyle Menendez on trial for the homicides of their parents, Kitty and Jose. This is their retrial. We've streamed through the first trial, second trial, no cameras, no experts, at least for the defense, nothing that the defense needs is allowed. I'm exaggerating a little, but not a whole lot. And and so now we're kind of comparing the two different trials and seeing what's different, what's not. And I'm already seeing a difference. I'm seeing a difference in the way that the judge is kind of allowing some things for the prosecution to slide and how the prosecution is trying this by ambush, trial by ambush. They are every day changing their witness list, or all of a sudden, discovery just appears the day that a witness is going to be on the stand. And it's very, very concerning if you are paying attention. And the judge, he's just like, yeah, whatever. Although this last time that they did it, he did get mad about it. So it was but taking him like 3 weeks to get there. So he's finally, telling the prosecution, maybe you should follow the rules of law and how you should proceed ethically. So he shouldn't have to tell him that, but he needed to. Anywho, so we are going to continue where we left off. I'm trying to remember who we had last time. We had Les Zoller and Glenn Stevens. Les Zoller, as I've said before, he's going to make multiple appearances throughout the trial as he's called back to, verify things or whatever. So he's going to be back a few times. But um, the interesting one was Glenn Stevens. He was a friend of Lyle's and now seems to be siding more with the prosecution and potentially lying for the prosecution because he didn't seem very credible to me. I mean, some things he said might have been credible, but not everything, and you could tell in the way that he was cross-examined by a really, really excellent cross-examination of Mr. Gessler. So we are going to move on today to Jamie Pisarcik's testimony. I double checked. That is how you pronounce it. It's Pisarcik. I think I've been pronouncing it Pisarcik. It's Pisarcik, like sick, like you're sick in the head, like that. That's the way I'm thinking of it is to remind myself. So it's Jamie Pisarcik. I will go forward from there, moving using that pronunciation. So before we get into Jamie's testimony, which by the way is going to be in multiple parts, so this is part A of probably 2 or 3 parts. I'm hoping no more than 3. She's on the stand for 3 days, so that's why I say that. So it extends for a few days, and there's some argument in between and things like that. So we're gonna need definitely to do this in parts. But before we do that, I do have an announcement to make, which is just horrific, horrific, horrific. So on Friday, I did a special stream, which I created a separate folder called The Path to Freedom, Menendez Brothers Path to Freedom, and it has everything like their appellate documents and most recently an update that I did on their hearing, which Friday's hearing was a hearing for Nathan Hochman to basically argue if there was any legal precedent for a current DA to rescind or, be able to object to a resentencing request from a predecessor, a previous DA. And they didn't, so it wasn't Nathan Hochman. So just to be clear, it wasn't Nathan Hochman doing the arguing on Friday. It was one of the deputy DAs. His name is Habib Balian. And he went on for more than 2 hours and basically just rehashed all of the negative, lies and spinning things, misrepresenting things, and being as gruesome and shocking as possible. and that included showing um it's crime scene video. And I talked about this on that stream on my latest episode, which was in the Path to Freedom folder, where I talk about this in more detail. But I don't want to go into all of, what happens on that hearing. I just wanted to give you guys an update in case you didn't watch that one. So they had a hearing, and ultimately the judge did rule that Nathan Hockman denied his motion to withdraw the request, was denied. So we are moving forward with a resentencing hearing this Thursday and Friday. It's going to take probably 2 days. There's going to be testimony. Erik and Lyle may or may not even take the stand. We don't know. During this past hearing, Erik and Lyle were via Zoom. They didn't speak or anything like that, but they were they were there via Zoom. So, anywho, this all I'm saying leading up to the really horrific part is that, so while it did end in a victory for the Menendez brothers, it was horrific because the fact that Terry Baralt, Teresita, you might remember her name is Teresita Baralt, she is the older sister of Jose Menendez. She had never seen the crime scene photos, and I'm sure that was for good reason. So she's gone 35 years without ever having seen or needing to see the crime scene photos, which have been like everywhere and in documentaries and all over the news. They were in the news like back in the day when you could publish a crime scene photo and like people didn't freak out, which I don't know, whatever. People are really sensitive now these days, but whatever. That's a whole different argument. I don't think it's that horrific, but whatever. I like learning, and I think you learn from viewing a crime scene. But anywho, so these crime scene photos have been public, and she's been able to avoid them these 35 years. And in the first trial, I believe they kept the photos, not large or anything like that. They had them small and like passed them out to the jury, and then they put them on like a tack board. They weren't large and up on a big screen and everybody viewing them and staring at them, which is basically what happened in Friday's hearing. And multiple times, I believe, is when he showed multiple scenes, multiple photos, multiple times. So, anywho, the family very, very understandably upset, and Anna Maria Baralt, the daughter of Terry Baralt, had she makes updates on her Instagram and stuff. She does live videos and whatnot. She did one, after the hearing, just elated about everything, how the hearing went for her. But then she explained that it was, it's not on the sad side of it, being re-traumatized, re-victimized over and over again by the DA's office. And now this, and her mother having never seen these photos, and now 35 years later, she has to see them at the age of 85 while she's battling colon cancer. She also just traveled from New Jersey to LA to be at this hearing. It's stressful enough to go to some kind of hearing like that, let alone, the travel and the age and the health and all of that. And then the DA does what they do, or the deputy DA. I mean, it's the whole DA's office. So that was awful. Not as awful as what happened Sunday morning. Terry was found unresponsive in her hotel room and rushed to the hospital. She's still in LA, and I don't have any updates on that right now. I don't know what really, what may come of it. I don't know her condition. I did want to remind people also that their other aunt, so Terry is a paternal aunt, and Joan Vandermolen is a maternal aunt. She has also been very outspoken, very vocal. You might remember her, standing up and speaking at certain events and things. And she's been in documentaries and things. She hasn't been, Terry has, on the other hand, kept her silence, but Joan has been vocal. Well, Joan was hospitalized back in December, and we have not at this point, as far as I know, heard an update on her health either, but she has been noticeably missing from appearances where, she would normally be, where the family attends. She's also, I want to say 93 or 95. Forgive me if I'm wrong, but she's in her 90s. Terry's in her 80s. And now Terry has been found unresponsive because of the stress, and the family does blame the DA. So there's that. And the DA should not have shown those photos. It is against Marcy's law to do something like that. He's not protecting the victims. Everything that he did in that hearing was against victims, the victims in the family who are advocating for the brothers to be released. So everything that he's doing is re-traumatizing the victims. And this Marcy's Law, which is a law that's put in place to protect victims in certain circumstances like this, is probably for this very reason, because, this is stressful. And poor Terry is now, I don't know what her condition is. The poor family is, I'm sure heartbroken with what's going on, as well as stressed. And it's also in a really bad time because they have to be there for the brothers as well because their hearings coming up Thursday and Friday. So it's awful. It just everything that they're doing to this family is awful. And I'm going on for a long time about it, but it's a bad thing. And Nathan Hawkman, burn in hell. That's all I have to say. All right. So I did want to play really briefly just a quick moment of Terry on so this is Terry Baralt. She's been silent for 35 years. She did a Good Morning America interview on well, it aired. I don't know when they did it, but it aired Friday morning, the morning of their hearing, and she talks about how much she loved the boys and how awful it is that her family is still suffering. So, a few minutes of this.
This morning, Jose Menendez's sole surviving sister breaking her silence for the first time in decades.
You've held your silence for 35 years.
For everybody, this is a story. For me, it's very personal. Those kids, they are like the boys that I didn't have. So it's time. 35 years is a long time. It's a whole branch of my family erased.
Yeah, I feel awful for her. The stress of everything. I can't imagine what's going on, with the family. And just my heart goes out to them. Prayers, whatever, if you're the praying kind, if you're the, send good vibes kind, whatever you can do, send it to the family. Send the good, positive, healing, loving energy to the family. They need it right now. So. All right, that took a while to get through. I apologize, but if you didn't watch the other video, it wouldn't all make total sense. So, all right, so let's get started then. And as you can see, I have on the screen all of our key players, the attorneys, and the judge. We are going to begin with Jamie Pisarcik, who is exactly where we left off last time. So we didn't miss a beat. And as I said before, um, this is going to be a couple parts because it's long. So she's on the stand for a while. We're going to try to get through all of her direct and maybe then a little more, but we'll see how far we get. All right, so Jamie is called. She's sworn in, and she spells her name, and direct examination begins. Ms. Nahara will be doing the questioning for the state. Ms. Pisarcik, do you know the defendant, Lyle Menendez, who is seated at the end of counsel table? Yes, I do. And did you first meet, when did you first meet Lyle? In the fall of 1986. And where did you meet him? In the Princeton, New Jersey area. And in September of 1987, did the defendant Lyle Menendez begin school at Princeton University? I believe, yes, he did. And were you in contact with him in September of 1987? Yes. And the court says, could you use that microphone, please? Ms. Abramson says, Your Honor, would there be an admonition to the jury with respect to this witness? The court says, yes. This testimony, the testimony of this witness, is admitted and received only as to the defendant, Lyle Menendez, and is to be considered by the jury only for that purpose. So, again, this is another one where it's only Lyle who will be. This is another time where, like, not having the two juries kind of screws Erik because all of this is going to come in and the jury can't unhear it for Erik, you know? So it's kind of unfair in that regard, I would say. Ms. Abramson says, thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Nahira says, thank you, Your Honor. Now, in January of 1988, did you become aware that the defendant, Lyle Menendez, had been suspended from Princeton for a year? Yes. And at that time, what were you doing? I was beginning a tennis tour. I was playing tennis throughout the world professionally. And did this tour begin around January of 1988? Yes, and continued through the whole year. And that was the year, strike that. Now, in the spring of 1988, while he was suspended from Princeton, did the defendant Lyle Menendez travel with you? Yes, he did. And where did the two of you travel to? He came over to Italy. I'm sorry, Spain and Italy and Germany. And was this traveling taking place while you were also on tour? Yes, it was. And how long did Lyle Menendez travel on tour with you? I believe it was just several weeks. And then following the spring and summer of '88, were you still in contact with Lyle Menendez? Yes. In fact, were you in contact with him the entire year that he was suspended from Princeton? Yes. And did you see him during the summer of 1988? Yes, I did. And where did you see him? I was traveling, playing tennis tournaments, but I was in California, so I guess California would be the most, he didn't travel with me any other places, although I did play some tournaments in, I believe, other parts of the country where he was too. Do you recall what parts of the country it was that you played tennis? The New Jersey area. I played a tournament in Birmingham, Alabama. And during the summer of 1988, while you were in contact with the defendant, Lyle Menendez, did he work for part of that summer at his father's business, Live Entertainment? Yes. Do you know how long he worked for his father? It wasn't a long period of time, maybe several months, I believe, throughout the summer. And did he attempt another job that summer of 1989? Yes, he did. Was that delivering pizza? Yes, it was. And how long did that job last? It was a very short period of time, I believe a matter of weeks. And did he ever tell you why that job lasted only a short time? Who gives a shit? He's delivering pizza. It's not like this is going to be his career. Does it matter that he quit a job after a couple weeks when he's like fresh out of college, high school, like what? So stupid. But okay. Let's all imply or make the impression or inference that he's very irresponsible because he left a pizza delivery job after a couple weeks. Really? Whatever. Ms. Towery objected to that and said it was irrelevant. The witness or the court overrules it. The witness says yes. Ms. Nahara says, "What was that?" He stated that he was delivering pizzas in his mother's Mercedes and that he wasn't getting tips because the people didn't think that he should be getting tips because he was delivering pizzas in a Mercedes. I mean, that's a valid, if you're not making money, then why do it? That's a valid complaint. But of course, and apart from working for his father and delivering pizzas, do you recall if he worked that summer at all? I think that was about it. Now, in January of '89, did the defendant Lyle Menendez return for his second semester at Princeton University? Yes, I believe he did. And was this his freshman year? Well, because he had not completed a full year, so I believe it was a continuation, yes. And sometime after the new semester began in January of '89, did you return to live in the Princeton area? Yes, I did. And about when was it that you returned? It had to be early January, February, early in the year. And at that time, were you and the defendant, Lyle Menendez, seeing each other? Yes. And at some point during that semester, did the two of you break up? Yes, we did. And when was that? I believe it was late spring. So that would be approximately April of '89. April or before, yes. Now, after you and the defendant, Lyle Menendez, broke up sometime around April of 1989, did you keep in contact with him? Yes. And from March of April of 1989 to August of 1989, did you keep in contact with the defendant? Yes, we did. And how did you keep in contact? Lyle would come throughout the summer to New Jersey. We were on a friendly basis. He would come and visit me. I was working at one of the jobs that I had was at a restaurant. He would come visit me there, pretty much in that area of New Jersey. And during that time that you had stopped seeing each other formally but were still in touch, did you attempt to arrange, did some help him arrange to be in a tennis tournament? Yes, I did. Were you in contact with Ms. Menendez at the time? Yes, I was. And apart from you, were any other members of your family also in contact with the defendant, Lyle Menendez, from March of 1989 to August of 1989? Yes, they were. And who else was in contact with him? Well, it was more like Lyle was in contact. Lyle kept in contact with my mother and my sisters. And were you living in Princeton at this time or someplace else? In the Lawrenceville area, which is very close to Princeton. And how did you keep in contact with the defendant, Lyle Menendez? Did you call him? Did you see him? Yeah, he called me. I talked to him on the phone. Again, like I said, he came into the restaurant. We went out on a friendly basis. And did you ever call him? I'm sure I did. Did your sisters ever call him? I would assume that he called them a little bit more so. He's very social. And that was something that came out recently too, is that with Anna Maria Baralt, his cousin, he's very social and he'll just call just to like chat and see what's up with the family. And he just likes to be in the know. He likes to gossip, basically. Like he's the one that like has to know everything that's going on with everybody. And at that time, during March of 1989 to August of 1989, when you were still in contact with the defendant, did you use some kind of calling card? Several times, yes. And was this the defendant's calling card or his parents' calling card? Well, it was told to me that it was his calling card, that it was a type of Watts line. And who told you this? Lyle did. And what did he tell you a Watts line was? He just basically said it was a line that was used, and he had given it out to my sisters, to myself, and to other friends just to use to call kind of on casual basis. And to your knowledge, were your sisters using it? To my knowledge, I did not know when or, how they used it, I guess. I don't know that Lyle gave it to them to use. Now, in August of 1989, did you learn that Jose Menendez and Kitty Menendez were dead? Yes, I did. And how did you learn this? I had a tennis coach who had contacted me when he heard the news, and he had just told me and he had heard that Lyle's parents had been taken out. Their lives had been taken. And when you learned this information, did you do anything with regards to the defendant? Yes, I immediately tried to contact him and tell him how sorry I was and had heard about the news. Now, do you know how soon after the actual homicides took place that you tried to contact Lyle Menendez? I believe it was the day after, perhaps Monday, maybe Tuesday, but I believe it was Monday. So, would this be Monday, August 21st, 1989, the day after the homicides? Yes, in the evening. And did you get a hold of the defendant? No, I did not. Sometime after that, what did you do? What did you do when you didn't get a hold of him? I left. There was a machine with Lyle's voice on it, and I just left a message. And did you tell him to call you back? Yes, I told him, to return my call at his convenience, that I had heard about his parents. And sometime after you left his message on Monday, August 21st, did you get a call back from the defendant? Yes, I did. Do you recall when that was? It was several days after either Wednesday or Thursday of that same week. And when he called you back, did you have a conversation with him? Yes, I did. And what'd he tell you? Yeah, what'd he tell you? He told me that he would like me to be present at the funeral that would be in New Jersey and if I could please be there for him. And did you go to the funeral in Jersey? Yes, I did. And did you go alone or did you go with someone? I went with my mother. And did you see the defendant Lyle Menendez at the funeral? I saw him at the funeral and the evening before. And did you see a lot of him during this period that he was back in New Jersey for this memorial service? Yes, I did. And were you also living in New Jersey at this time in Lawrenceville? Yes, correct. Now, how long did he stay for? How many days did he stay for the memorial service in New Jersey? I don't recall the exact amount, but it was for a long period. I don't know if it had to be at least a week. And then did he go somewhere? Well, he went to the US Open. That was about the same time. And then I believe, I'm not sure. I'm not sure after that. Now, this period after the memorial service would have been late August or early September, somewhere in there. Yes. Would this be of the year 1989? Yes. And did you go with him to the US Open? Yes, I did. Was this in New York? Correct. At that time, was Lyle Menendez accompanied by a bodyguard? Yes. One bodyguard or more than one? I believe there were two. And what was he using by way of transportation? A bulletproof limo. And do you recall when the US Open was in 1989? It was a 2-week tournament, so it's usually the last week of August going through Labor Day into the first week of September. And do you know what day you went to the US Open? I don't remember the exact day. It was several days after the service. I believe my mother was still in town and she was in town for about 4 or 5 days. And apart from going to the US Open in New York with the defendant, did you also spend time with him in New Jersey? Yes. And do you recall approximately how much time was spent in New Jersey? We had dinner one night with my mother. We spent some time. We wanted to shop. Ms. Towery objects, non-responsive. The court says sustained. The answer is stricken. Ms. Nahara says, do you recall, as you sit there, Approximately how many days you spent in New Jersey altogether? 3 or 4, I would imagine. Apart from going to the US Open in New York, did you spend any time with the defendant in New York? No, it was pretty much centered around the US Open. And at some point, did the defendant cease having bodyguards? Do you mean while in that area? While in Princeton, while you were with him? I don't recall that. I recall them being there pretty much while he was around me. So during the time that you spent, uh, the time spent, so during that time that you spent time with him in Princeton, the defendant was also accompanied by bodyguards. Is that right? Yes. And during that time, did he buy a Porsche? It was close to that time. Okay. Were you with him at the time that he bought the Porsche? I was with him when he told me about it, when he told me that he wanted to buy it. I wasn't there for the actual purchase. Ms. Towery, objection. Motion to strike the previous answer and not within the personal knowledge of the witness. The court has sustained the answer and previous answer is stricken as beyond the personal knowledge and hearsay. Ms. Nahara says, and actually, to clarify that question, because I don't think I asked you the question that I think I wanted to. The time that you were spending with Lyle Menendez, was this the time period that you were aware that he purchased a Porsche? Yes, I believe it was. So, as to that time period, it was the time period that he had bodyguards. Is that right? Yes. Was he making other purchases during this time period? Objection, failure of discovery. Court says, all right, this was something that we discussed, and you may want to go into it after further discussions. Objection sustained. Ms. Nahara says, okay. At some point, did you talk with the defendant, Lyle Menendez, after his parents' homicide? Yes. And did he tell you what he thought about it or who took his parents' lives? Yes, he did. And did you have this discussion, or when did you have this discussion? The first time we had this discussion was the night before the memorial service in the Princeton area. And what did he tell you during that discussion on the night before this memorial service? He said that it must have been either a mob or mafia related, that they must have been after his father. Did he tell you anything about his belief that somehow the word rhymes with corn industry was also tied into this? Objection, leading, suggestive. Court says sustained. Ms. Nahara says, did he tell you anything else in this conversation? Yes, he did. And what did he tell you? He did say that the live entertainment business that his father was involved with did have rhymes with corn ties, and that that could have been a reason. And did he tell you that the business had ties, or did he tell you that his father wanted to keep that from happening? I believe that the business had those ties, and his father was trying to prevent it, and therein lies the mob tie-in. Now, at some point, did the defendant Lyle Menendez leave New Jersey? Yes, he did. And how long did he stay from the memorial service to when he left Princeton? I can't be exact, but I think it was at least a week to a week and a half, maybe even 2. And did you remain in Princeton or did you go somewhere? I stayed in Princeton for a while and then I was in Israel playing a tennis tournament after that. So was she with Erik when he was, because remember he was in Israel when he got arrested, or he said he would turn himself in, but that's when he found out that his brother was arrested. He was in an Israel tennis tournament. And how long did you remain in Princeton after the defendant left? I was in Princeton until early October, I'm sorry, late September, and then was over in Israel for 3 weeks. Now, from late September to the end of the year, 1989, Were you in touch with the defendant, Lyle Menendez? Yes. And at some point, I take it you returned from Israel. Can you tell us when that was? That could have been late October. And when you returned from Israel, did you contact the defendant? Yes. And were you seeing him at the time? Yes. And where did you contact him? In California or in New Jersey? I believe in California. And when you came back from Israel, did you come back to Alabama or New Jersey or where? Actually, first to Princeton, New Jersey. Lyle and I had been in contact also when I was in Israel as well, but I returned back to New Jersey after Israel. And after you contacted him when you returned and you were in New Jersey, did the two of you talk about perhaps your moving someplace else? Yes. And what did you guys discuss? No, he had asked me if I would if I would consider coming out to California to help him get his life back together, and he was going through a tough time, obviously, and flat out asked me if I would consider coming out and helping him get his life back together again. And do you know when this conversation took place? We had talked about it while I was over in Israel, but nothing was really finalized till after I got back from playing tennis. And at some point, did you move out to California? Yes, I did. And when was that? Early November of that same year when I got back. That would be early November of 1989. Correct. Okay, and you moved out to California. When did you, or where did you stay? Well, we first started to stay at the Menendez home in Beverly Hills, but then shortly after Lyle purchased the place at the Marina City Club, the apartment. So when you say we first stayed, the we you're referring to is you and the defendant? Myself and Lyle. So when you stayed at the Beverly Hills home, did anyone else stay there as well? Yes. And who else was there? Erik was there as well. Anybody else? Not that I remember at this time. Saberson says, Your Honor, I'd ask that we approach at this point. The court says, well, let's just hold off until we get to. Ms. Abrahamson says, I move to strike the witness's last answer for discovery violation. The court says, okay, we'll deal with that after the break. Ms. Nahara says, now, at some point, Lyle Menendez moved to the Marina City condo. Is that correct? Correct. And when you testified earlier, I believe you said, did you say we moved in there? Yes. So you moved in to the Marina City condo as well. Correct. Is this also called the Marina City Towers? Yes. And do you recall how long you lived in the Marina City Towers? I was there for a relatively short period of time until mid-January of the following year, several months. And I take it you were living there with the defendant, Lyle Menendez, at Christmas of 1989. Is that right? Yes. And at that time, did you receive a car from the defendant, Lyle Menendez? Yes. What kind of car was it? It was a blue Saab. This is a nice boyfriend. Lyle's a good guy. I mean, he's flying all over the country for her. He's buying her cars. He seems to be a decent boyfriend. And what was the occasion that you received the blue Saab? It was a Christmas gift. Ms. Nahara says, actually, Your Honor, this would end the point. The court says, I'm sorry. This would end where we're going up to before we enter a whole new area if you want to take a break now. The court says, all right, we'll resume tomorrow. Then we will ask, and then we ask you to return at 8:30. Ladies and gentlemen, don't discuss the matter with anybody. Don't form any final opinions. Blah, 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 blah. All right, we got a little bit of argument here before the next day begins. All right, so the court says, Ms. Abramson, you wanted to be heard on something. She says, I don't know why counsel has to always wander off and get into things that we haven't been given notice of. This is the first I ever heard that this witness was going to be asked to testify that she moved to the Beverly Hills home or that my client was living there. I don't see why it was necessary to bring in a reference to my client when this witness is supposed to only be a witness against Lyle Menendez. We have no discovery on that fact. It just seems like gratuitously reaching out whenever they can to get something prejudicial before the jury, and I object to it and ask that it be stricken and the jury admonished. The court says, all right, people wish to be heard. Thank you, Your Honor, says Ms. Nahara. First of all, Your Honor, there's absolutely nothing prejudicial. The only thing ever elicited, and it's just foundational, is that when she moved here from New Jersey, she lived at the Beverly Hills home and also was living there with Lyle, Erik, and I thought Mark Heffernan. Ms. Abramson says, Mark Heffernan? And Ms. Nair says, well, he was around, but we didn't get to explain that because she didn't remember it. It was, quite frankly, foundational. It wasn't anything prejudicial or even all that important. But if counsel wants it stricken, that's fine. I have no objection. Ms. Abramson says, the problem is, Your Honor, whenever they wander off these things into these areas, it winds up with things we have to disprove. Living at the home. The only person for sure living at that home was Maria Carlotta Menendez, who the witness conveniently forgets. And it just requires excess and unnecessary litigation. But there's just no reason to wander. The court says, all right. In a situation where the witness is clearly only testifying as to Lyle Menendez, if counsel for the prosecution can elicit answers that relate only to Lyle Menendez, that would negate the need for hearings such as we're having now. All right. That's it. That's all he says. All right. Tomorrow morning, I'll strike the reference to Erik Menendez living at the house. Ms. Abramson says, thank you, Your Honor. The court says, all right. Anything else now before we take a break? Any other issues? Why? They never. Okay. All he says to the prosecution is, you would really save us some time. We wouldn't have to do these hearings if you would just, do what you're supposed to be doing. So basically, it's a slap on the wrist yet again, like not even an admonishment. But anyways, let's move on. So Ms. Abramson says, I think they're still checking on the stipulation. The bailiff says, Your Honor, jurors are going to be walking out. Court says, okay. The jury exited the jury room. The court says, the jurors have left. Is there anything else that you need to, at this point, to discuss? Anybody? Mr. Gessler says, we're in the process of working out the stipulation with Miss Sugarman, Your Honor. I think that Mr. Khan wanted the answer to a phone call before we could work out the details, and apparently the person to whom the phone call must be made was not available because of the 3-hour time distance. I'm satisfied with the stipulation we've worked out. If it works out that Mr. Khan is also satisfied after the verification that he's requested. Mr. Khan says, yes, I'm satisfied. It can be worked out and we'll word it tomorrow. The court says, okay, all right, then we resume with Ms. Pisarcik tomorrow. Who else is on tap after her testimony? Ms. Nahara says, can I have a moment, Your Honor? Your Honor, it would be Ms. Pisarcik, Ms. Eisenberg, and possibly another stipulation for the Princeton places. Is that right, Mr. Gessler? Mr. Gessler says, if I can contact the lady in question, yes. Court says, okay. And Ms. Nahara says, and the coroner's representative, Your Honor. So perhaps if we end early, maybe we can deal with that issue. We have a couple of motions on tap, one of them dealing with the coroner's representative. The court says, okay, all right, we'll be in recess until tomorrow. All right, so that is the end of day, I don't know what day. We're on October 31st. And now we're going to move on to November 1st. Oops, I'm not on page 1. Let me get there. And make this bigger. All right, so, and like magic, night turns into the next day. It goes from October 31st to November 1st. And we're back in session. The court says, okay, the jury is not here. All participants are present. What is it that you want to talk about before the jury comes in? Ms. Nahara says, Your Honor, there's one thing I wanted to put on the record that I had already spoken to defense counsel about, and that was, so the court understands, there was a third part of the conversation involving the confession, which was not litigated, which involved the defendant Erik Menendez. And what that was a statement by Ms. Pisarcik that she asked Mr. Menendez, Lyle Menendez, why he didn't run away, and his response was that he wanted to try, that he wanted to, but Erik didn't. I spoke to Ms. Abramson about that, and she told me that she spoke to Mr. Gessler, I mean Mr. Levin, and they decided they wouldn't be objecting to that. So that will be coming in. It does mention Erik Menendez, and I wanted the court to know that we had discussed it and there was no objection. Mr. Levin says there's no objection on behalf of Erik Menendez so long as there's no additional follow-up. If that's the sum and the substance of what's said and there's nothing additional to that, then we have no objection. Ms. Nahara says that's all we have and that's all there's been discovery of. Court says, all right, anything else? Who are your witnesses after Pisarcik? Mr. Levin says, Your Honor, we have Ms. Pisarcik and then Ms. Eisenberg. And then, I believe, as to Ms. Sugarman and Ms. McHugh, we'll have the stipulations, I believe. Mr. Gessler says, Yes, I'm willing to stipulate on the grounds that we worked out. Ms. Nahara says, We have to work out the wording, but that's going to happen. One thing I wanted to ask counsel, and I just thought about it right now. Then the attorneys confer. The court says, why does it say Ms. Abramson just enters the room? I don't know. And then the court says, okay, we'll be in recess until the jury arrives. The court says, okay, we're ready to resume with the trial. We'll have the jury out, and I will, pursuant to the discussion we had yesterday, inform the jury that the answer the witness gave in regard to living at the house and who was living at the house in Beverly Hills will be stricken, and then we'll resume with the testimony of the witness. Samerson says, thank you, Your Honor, and you'll tell them to disregard it? Court says, yes. Thank you, Your Honor. Court says, let's get the jury out, please. And the court says, now the jury is in the courtroom. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. There was one answer that was given yesterday in the witness testimony in which she related where she was living. At one point, she said she stayed at the house of Beverly Hills, and she said who was staying there at the house at the same time that she was. The entire answer is stricken, and you are to disregard it in its entirety as to staying at the house in Beverly Hills and who was staying there with her. All right, Jamie Pisarcik, a witness at time of adjournment, having been previously sworn, testified further as follows. Court says, okay, would you state your name again for the record? And she does. I remind you that you're still under oath and will be continuing the direct examination. Ms. Nahara says, thank you. Ms. Pisarcik, I believe yesterday I was talking with you about Christmas time of 1989. Do you recall that? Yes, I do. Now, sometime after Christmas in 1989, in January of 90, were you still living with the defendant Lyle Menendez at the Marina City Towers? For a short period of time. And at some time, did you move out? Yes, I did. When do you recall that was? It would be mid-February or mid-January. And after you moved out, did you remain in contact with the defendant? Yes. Were you still seeing one another? Yes. And were you aware of something happening to him in March of 1990? Yes. And what was that? March of 1990 was when Lyle was arrested. And after the defendant was arrested in March of 1990, did you continue seeing him? Yes. And did you visit him at the jail? Almost every day. And from the time he was arrested in March to the end of March 1990, did you visit him almost every day that month? Yes. When you say every day until when? Every day until throughout that whole year until the end of the year. So approximately how long did you visit him every day from March of 1990 to December of 1990? The minimum time that was allowed was 20 minutes. Sometimes it was much longer than that. Sometimes the individuals that brought Lyle down would allow him to stay an hour, sometimes even longer than that. Now, calling your attention to early December of 1990, this would be approximately 9 months after the defendant was arrested. Did you have a visit with him in early December of 1990 where you talked with him about his defense? Yes. And do you recall this conversation with the defendant Lyle Menendez? Yes, I do. And could you tell the jury what was said in that conversation? In this conversation, Lyle had asked me if I would say that his father had done what was done to a character in a movie, and the movie was called At Close Range, and he had asked me to lie and say that his father had done that to me. Now, were you familiar with the movie At Close Range? Yes. Lyle and I had seen it together. And when you said a scene, did he call attention to that particular scene? Yes, he did. And could you describe this scene? The scene was one that the father of the main character and the girlfriend of the main character were in a room together, and the father had given the girl a pill, a drug, and she was a little groggy. And the father had asked her not to see the son anymore, and she said that she could know she couldn't do that because she loved this character, and then she proceeded to try to leave. Objection. Failure of discovery, says Ms. Towery. The court says, I'm sorry. Failure of discovery, yet again. Overruled. So I'm assuming that this is potentially a different scene or a different take on what we've heard before, because I thought he was being physically aggressive with her in the scene. Um, so maybe it's just a different description. I don't know. I don't know what the difference is here, but apparently failure of discovery. Yet again, they did not turn over something in discovery regarding what she just said. So they're just finding this out now, which is, again, that's pretty much par for the course here. And so the court overruled that, and the witness says, and she had proceeded to try to leave, and the father character would not let her leave the room. And then what happened was the father kind of looked at her very strangely, and she said no. And then the father said, I'm not asking you. And then he pushed her down on the bed and proceeded to R her. Ms. Nahara says, and when Lyle Menendez asked you to say that his father had done what this character in the movie had done in the scene, how did you respond to that? Well, it had been about a year, I guess, maybe a little longer, since I had seen the movie, but I knew exactly what Lyle was talking about. And I just basically said, I can't believe you were asking me to do this, and it's a lie, and nothing like that has ever happened, that your father would never do that to me, nor did he. Yeah, that's because he liked young boys, not girls. Yeah, I mean, he liked women too, I guess, because he had an affair with Kitty, he had an affair with another woman. Um, While he was married to Kitty, I should say. And how did the defendant respond when you said that? He said that I had to do it because a large sum of money was going to be placed in my bank account and that I had to do it. And I said, the minute a cent is put into my bank account, I'm going right to the police with this. And when you told, okay, sorry, I just keep reading. So that was the end of her answer. Next question is, and when you told him that you'd go to the police if he put money in your bank account, did he respond? He finally backed off and said, yeah, well, I figured you wouldn't go for this and that you wouldn't do this. Did he tell you anything else? Just that he was working on his defense and this was going to be part of it. Now, after he told you this last part, did this conversation continue or not? Not much longer. I don't believe he was down there for much longer, but it was obviously very upsetting, and it was just something I told him I would not do. Now, did you continue visiting him on a regular basis after he had this meeting with him and this conversation? Yes. And sometime later that month, in mid December of 1990, did you have another meeting with the defendant, Lyle Menendez, where he talked about the crime? Yes. And what do you recall happened at that meeting? Well, when Lyle started to ask me to do things like lie for him regarding the movie, I obviously started to question because up until that point I believed 100% in his innocence and did not know that he had committed this crime. So, I started questioning him and asking him and telling him that I needed to know the truth, whatever it was. And then finally, in the later part of December, he did tell me the truth. And when did you say he told you the truth? Was this during this did he tell you something about the crime during the meeting in mid-December? Yes. And what did he do at this meeting in mid-December concerning telling you about this crime? He held up a pre-written letter that had the admission, the confession, that he did take his parents' lives. Now you say he held up a letter. He had done that in the past, held up things rather than told you things? Yes, private things, things that he didn't want other people to hear. Yes. And how was this meeting room set up so you can describe that to the jury? Well, there were several different areas that Lyle was brought down to. One was where it was fairly open and there were prisoners on either side of him. But in this instance, it was the very first row, which was more like a private box. So it was a little bit more secluded. And when you say he held up things, private things, was this for so that he could remain confidential? Yes. And you said he held up the letter. Do you recall how long that letter was? It was a lengthy letter, approximately, I would say, 7 to 8 pages in total. It was hard to tell, but it was thick. And you started reading the letter? How much of it did you read? Just several pages of it. Just several pages. Not much, just several. And did you stop reading it before that letter ended? Yes. Now, starting with the first part that you read, do you recall how it started out? Yes, I do. And how did it start out? It started out by him apologizing to me for having to have lied to me for such a long time, and that he was very sorry that he could not have told me the truth during the 10 months that I had come down to see him and visit him. And then did he proceed, then, after this apology, what else was in the letter? After he apologized for not being able to tell me the truth, he did, indeed, tell me the truth that he had taken his parents' lives. And at that point, did he give you a reason why he had taken his parents' lives? Yes, he did. He had said that it was because that his mother had SA'd him and his brother was also A'd by his father. So where's the lie, Nathan Hochman? When did they start lying about this? I mean, he was telling his girlfriend when he finally confessed and told her the truth and apologized for lying to her. He said this was part of the reason as to why they were defending themselves. They were protecting themselves from a very terrible situation in the home. Hochman wants us to believe that they've been concocting this theory and it took them months and months and months and months and months to come up with while they were in prison and all that. But here, Jamie Pisarcik just testified that that was the reason. He confessed to the essay that was going on in the home to Jamie, who, of all people, I would assume she's probably the closest with him. He probably confides in her the most. So I'm thinking this is the real reason. Why? So there you go. But yet here we are, 35 years later, Nathan Hawkman's still going on and on and on about how they're just liars and making stuff up. Now, how long after he had asked you to lie and say that his father had aid you did he come up with this letter? Within weeks. And was this letter shown to you after he told you that he was working on his defense? Yes. And when you read the part of the letter, did you stop reading it? I'm sorry, you testified that you stopped reading it. Why did you stop reading it? Well, I stopped reading it because I came to the part in the letter that had said that his mother had SA'd him, and I stopped and I said, I do not believe this. And that's when he ripped the letter away and would not let me continue reading it. Well, you're not trusting him or believing him, so why would he want to trust you with the rest? I don't see how this hurts them, but whatever. I look at it from the lens of, they're victims. The brothers are victims. Now, when you told him that you did not believe this, did you say anything else to him? Well, at that point, I was very upset and I was crying. I just asked him why. Why did you do this? At that point, I just couldn't understand how he could possibly do it. And I asked him why, and he said he tried to leave, but Erik didn't want to. And he was kind of going on, but the conversation didn't go much longer. This is so heartbreaking because Lyle was already at a point in his life where he kind of could leave if he wanted to, sort of. Like he was allowed freedom. He was allowed some freedom in his life. He was allowed to go live his life and do things as an adult would. Erik, on the other hand, was not. So Erik, it's not that he didn't want to leave, it's that he couldn't leave. He couldn't just go. His father was keeping him under his thumb. So he couldn't go anywhere, whereas Lyle could leave. But they were in different situations because Lyle was given all the freedom and all the accolades and everything, and Erik was not given any of that. It's just so heartbreaking. Continuing on. Again, we were interrupted, but it was a very emotional scene. Now, when you say you were interrupted, what interrupted you? Again, the police officers that came down to talk, to take Lyle back. Now, going back to the early part of December, the first conversation before he showed you the letter, the conversation where he asked you to lie for him, when he mentioned the movie At Close Range, had you been asked about this instant that happened? Yes. How in the past have you described this scene from At Close Range? I had described it in the past as being objection, hearsay, overruled, as being kind of a come on from the father to the daughter, or not to the daughter, to the girlfriend. I'm sorry. Ms. Nahara says, do you recall in the past, did you recall the scene as what you have described in court today? I remember it as it was a very violent movie, and I remember it being violent, but I had not described it as being the R word. And why is that? I had not seen the movie in a very long time, and the whole movie was extremely violent, and I guess I just didn't pinpoint that exact instance. It did come to memory at the time. What? You just said you couldn't pinpoint it, and then you said it did come to memory. What? Have you since refreshed your memory by reviewing the movie? Yes. And when you reviewed, well, did you review the scene in the movie? Yes. When you reviewed it, do you recall that that was the movie that you saw with Lyle Menendez? Yes, indeed. Do you remember when you saw it? It was obviously before Lyle was in jail, but it was, I would say, several months before he was in jail. So I would imagine that prior to Christmas of that year, probably 89, while I was living probably in the Marina City Club or around that time. Now, after the second conversation where he told you that he had taken his parents' lives, did you continue seeing him after that conversation? I went through a period of almost denial that he was just telling me this and he really didn't take his parents' lives, and I wanted to believe that he didn't. But then the truth kind of set in, and I did see him for a short period of time afterwards, but not long. And at some point after that, did you break up with him? Yes. And about when was that? It had to be late. I told him that I did not no longer wanted to see him and that I wasn't going to be his girlfriend anymore, but I did go down and see him probably though maybe mid-January, occasionally, not like I had before. And after January of 91, were you seeing the defendant? No. Ms. Nahir says, "Can I have a moment? I have nothing further at this time, Your Honor." Cross-examination begins. Ms. Towery will be doing the questioning. And she says, "Good morning, Ms. Pisarcik." "Hello. You met Lyle Menendez in the fall of 1986, is that right?" "Correct." "And at that time, he was taking classes at a junior community college called Trenton State, is that right?" "Yes." "He was just beginning to take classes?" "Correct." "The 18th. That was the fall semester, yes?" "He hadn't started at Princeton?" No, he had to take those classes in order to get into Princeton. All right. And at the time that you met him, you had graduated from college? Correct. And you were playing tennis as a professional, is that right? Yes. And you had been in Europe playing before you met Lyle Menendez and then returned to Princeton to train with a coach, is that right? Correct. And what was the coach's name? His name was Robert Klaus. Was he also known as Robbie? Yes. And was Robbie Klaus coaching Lyle Menendez as well as yourself? Ms. Nahara says, "Objection, irrelevant. The court overrules that. The witness says yes." Ms. Towery continues, "Is that how you met him?" "Yes, we met on a tennis court." "And were you living with Robbie Klaus at the time?" "Objection, irrelevant. Overruled." Robbie had an apartment where he housed several different players that were training with him. So it really was like was like we weren't living anywhere. We were staying there where we trained. A lot of us were traveling around the world, you know. That was our job, playing tennis. So while we were training with Robbie, you know, we stayed with him or, you know, elsewhere. Was he your boyfriend at the time, Robbie? No. Did you have a boyfriend at the time? No. Objection, irrelevant, overruled. Miss Towery says, "You didn't have a boyfriend at the time?" "Not that I remember. It was a very long time ago." "Were you engaged to a young man in Germany at that time?" No. Is she lying? When you met Lyle Menendez, where was he living, if you recall? I believe he was living in his Princeton home. And where was that? I don't remember the exact street. I remember the house, though. Okay, can you describe the house for us? There's a long drive. Objection, irrelevant, overruled. Long driveway. I believe it was a stone and wooden house. Was it a big house? Yes. Surrounded by a lot of land? Lot of land, woods, and I believe there were some ponds, water, little bit of water. A big lake behind it, is that right? Mm-hmm. And the driveway was very long, wasn't it? About a mile, I think. So it was on a lot of property. Yes. And was he living there with his parents at the time that you met him? No. His parents had moved to California? They still owned that house, but actually, that is the place where I met the Menendezes when they came back and returned. I believe it was at Thanksgiving of that year. So Lyle, or not Lyle, Jose was interested in uh like real estate and collecting homes and commercial properties and real estate properties and things like that because remember it came up with one of those real estate agents that was at the Marina City Club that said Lyle wanted to he was interested in real estate perhaps. Was it him? Now I'm forgetting who the witness was that said it, but somebody said that he was interested in real estate. So it makes sense that he was interested in real estate, and that's why he was looking for all the different homes and places to rent out to people potentially. And his father had a habit of collecting homes. He had a house in Jersey and a house in California, apparently. So with a lot of property in New Jersey. So you see that, you grow up with that, so you think that's, as an adult, that's how you should do things too, just collect property. So it's not like he's doing anything that he wasn't exposed to already. But the state wants to be like, oh, but he's such a crazy, he's so crazy for money, whatever. Anyways, and was he living there with his parents at the time that you met him? No, his parents had moved to California. That they still owned that house, but actually this is a place where I met the Menendezes when they came back and returned. I believe it was at Thanksgiving of that year. All right. But they lived in California at the time and Lyle was living in this big house, is that correct? Yeah, Lyle and one of his cousins. And he was going to school at that time, is that right? Correct. Now, Lyle wasn't just someone you mentioned in your direct testimony that you were in contact with Lyle Menendez over this period of time when you met him in 1986 to April of 1989. He was actually your boyfriend during that time, wasn't he? Yes. And, but we did break up several times, so there were times that he was my boyfriend and times that he wasn't. So did you live with him at the big house at Princeton that you just described? Well, again, living with is, I stayed there when I wasn't playing tennis. Did I set up? Did I have mail there? No. But yes, I did spend time with him there and stay with him while I was in the area. Ms. Towery says, "Can I approach, Your Honor?" Court says, "Yes." Ms. Towery says, "I'm going to show you an exhibit that was marked as number 370 in the last trial. I think the next in order is 151. Is that right, Your Honor?" The court says, "Yes." Ms. Towery says, "Let me just show you this. You looked at that exhibit when you testified at the previous trial, correct?" "Correct." "By the way, you did testify at the previous trial, did you not?" "Yes, I did." "And that refreshed your recollection as to whether you stayed with Lyle at the house in—" May I read this, please? Ms. Nahara says, "Your Honor, I'm going to interject an objection as to time, vague as to time." The court says, "Okay, one step at a time here. Let's see if this refreshes her recollection." The witness says, "Okay, thank you." It must be the transcript from trial one. Ms. Towery says, "Does that refresh your recollection as to whether or not you at least stayed with Lyle at the big Princeton house in 1986? Yes, as it states in that letter, I was there for several days." I think, does she mean 98 or 98? I mean 88 or 89 perhaps, because 86 is too soon. I don't think they were dating that early. Anyways, all right, maybe it's a typo. All right, and that's a letter that you wrote to Lyle Menendez after he was arrested, is that right? It says March 26, 1990. And you indicated in your direct testimony that he was arrested in early March. Is that correct? I believe so. So this would have been after the arrest. Yes. And then in the letter, you talk about the heat being turned off in the house and you two being very cold in the house. Is that right? Ms. Nahara says, I'm going to object on relevancy grounds as to the content of the letter. The court says, sustained. Ms. Towery says, at some point while you were staying, or Lyle Menendez was staying at the house in Princeton, did his parents have all the furniture removed? Objection calls for speculation from the witness and assumes a fact, not an evidence. The court says sustained on the former ground. Ms. Towery says, was all the furniture removed from the house in Princeton at some point while Lyle Menendez was staying there? I don't recall. You don't recall, or it was not removed. I don't remember if it was or not. Now, in 1987, Lyle Menendez was still your boyfriend. You hadn't broke up, had you? No, we were together in 87. And he went to Australia. Maybe it was 86 then that they got together or met or whatever in that house. Maybe it wasn't a typo. He went to Australia in February of 87 with Robbie Klaus, did he not? I don't know if he went with Robbie Klaus. I remember him traveling with a friend by the name of Cole. I don't know if Robbie was with him or not. Ms. Towery says, may I approach again, Your Honor? The court says yes. I have a document that was marked at the previous trial as Exhibit 375. I'd ask that it be marked for identification as Exhibit 152, Your Honor. Court again says yes. Again, I'll show you a document that appears to be a letter. Is that a letter that you wrote to Lyle Menendez? Mm-hmm. And what's the date of that letter? This one is February 10th of 1987. And does that, take a look at it and see if it refreshes your recollection as to whether or not Lyle Menendez went to Australia with Robbie Klaus. Does that help you recall? According to that, it does look like he was there with Robbie. Ms. Nahara says, I'm going to object, Your Honor. I believe there's no foundation. Ms. Towery says, does that refresh? Sustained. The answer is stricken. Ms. Towery says, does that refresh your recollection as to who Lyle Menendez went to Australia with in February of 1987? Yes. And that was Robbie Klaus, isn't it? Yes. And Lyle Menendez was playing at a tennis tournament when he went to Australia with Robbie Klaus, wasn't he? Yes. Ms. Nahara says, I'm going to object. Calls for speculation. She wasn't there. Sustained. The answer is stricken. Your understanding, according to what Lyle Menendez told you, was the reason he went to Australia was in order to play in a tennis tournament, wasn't it? Objection, hearsay, overruled. Yes. So while he was in Australia, do you recall him calling you virtually every night? I don't recall him calling me every night. He could have. I'm sure we talked a lot. Ms. Towery continues, I have a document that was marked at the previous trial, Your Honor, as Exhibit 374. I'd ask that this be marked as 153 for identification. The court says 153. Ms. Towery says, again, I'll ask you to take a look at the document that appears to be a page of a letter written by you. What's the date of that letter? This is February 17th, 1987. And does that appear to be a letter that you wrote to Lyle Menendez while he was in Australia? Yes, it does. Does that refresh your recollection that you called, or that he called you virtually every night while he was in Australia? Yes, it says I look forward to hearing from him every night. It doesn't say that he did. Ms. Nahara says, I'd object and make a motion to strike as hearsay. Objection sustained. The answer is stricken as non-responsive. That wasn't even the objection. Ms. Towery says, did you receive telephone calls from Lyle Menendez most every night while he was in Australia in 87? It was 1987. I really don't remember. Okay. The letter doesn't help you refresh your recollection regarding that? No, I don't believe it does. She is a difficult witness, man. She's like, no, I'm not giving you an inch. Would you have written, I look forward to hearing your voice every night if he didn't call you at that time? I don't know. I'm sure at that time I did look forward to hearing from Lyle as often as possible. But you wouldn't have written something that wasn't true in a letter to him, would you? Obviously not. And that's your handwriting, isn't it? Yes, it is. And that is a letter that you wrote, isn't it? Correct. And at the time that you wrote it, you would have written it, or you did write to him things that you felt were true at the time. Is that correct? Correct. You also mentioned, I think in that letter, you mentioned somebody named Sapphire. Ms. Nahara says, Your Honor, I'm going to object to anything referring to the content of the letter as irrelevant. Court says, sustained. Ms. Towery says, Who was Sapphire? Ms. Nahara says, I'm going to object. No relevancy. Sustained. Did Lyle buy you a bird named Sapphire? Objection irrelevant and also vague as to time. Court says, let's first establish a time frame here. Ms. Towery says, around the time that you wrote the letter or prior to it, did Lyle buy you a bird named Sapphire? Objection irrelevant, overruled. The witness says, that was overruled? I'm sorry. Court says, yes, you can answer the question. The witness says, yes, he did. Ms. Towery says, and he gave that to you as a gift? Yes. And he also bought you a number of other gifts during the time that you and he were together, is that right? Yes, it was reciprocal. We both bought each other gifts. We were boyfriend and girlfriend. Well, would you say that Lyle Menendez was generous with you during the time that he was your boyfriend? Yes, Lyle was very kind. And generous? Yes. And he bought you jewelry, didn't he? Yes, he did. Objection vague as to time. Overruled. How long was he your boyfriend, except for the periods that you broke up that you indicated? Pretty close to 4 years. And the lengthiest period that you broke up was when you broke up with him in April of 1989 until you got back together with him until or after the homicides of his parents. Is that right? Correct. Other breakups were short. Is that correct? Relatively. And you were, well, let me back up a minute. He brought you rings, didn't he, during the time that you were his girlfriend? He bought me a ring and then he bought me an engagement ring when he proposed to me. All right. And he bought you bracelets. Is that right? Mm-hmm. And he bought you watches. I don't recall if there was a watch in there. There may have been. And he bought you clothing. Is that right? Sometimes. And he bought you things like teddy bears. Is that right? Yeah, pretty standard. Sent you flowers. Nods head up and down. Is that right? Yes. And he was very generous in giving you gifts. Isn't that a fair statement? Ms. Nahir says, objection asked and answered. Overruled. You can answer the statement. The witness says, well, yeah, Lyle was very generous. He also gave a lot of gifts as his way of trying to make things better a lot of times. That was his way of trying to solve a lot of problems. Wow. 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 Okay. Ms. Towery says, okay, now he gave you a number of gifts, the things that I've just mentioned. He gave you all of these things prior to the deaths of his parents, didn't he? All of these types of things. Yes, he did, correct. Now, when Lyle was in Australia and calling you, his grandfather died, didn't he? I don't remember. Do you recall Lyle being upset that his grandfather died while he was in Australia and wanting to come home? I do remember his grandfather dying and Lyle being upset. I don't remember the exact time. Do you remember if Lyle was out of the country at the time that his... No, this time I don't recall. Do you recall him not being permitted to go to his grandfather's funeral? Ms. Nahara says, I'm going to object, calls for speculation and hearsay. Sustained. Ms. Tari says, when Lyle Menendez went to Australia for this tennis tournament in February of 1987, where were you living? In February of 87, I would have been in Birmingham, Alabama. And when did you move to Birmingham? In, I believe, either late January or early February of 1987. And you moved there from Princeton? Well, the Princeton area. Well, I had broken my ankle and I was home in Pennsylvania actually prior to that. And where's your home in Pennsylvania? Objection, irrelevant, overruled. My family's home is in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Ms. Tari says, is that where you grew up? Yes, it is. And that's where your mother lives? Is that right? Objection, irrelevant. Yes, my family lives there. Ms. Tari says, and your father lives there? Yes. When you moved do you know when Lyle Menendez came back from Australia? I don't recall, no. Do you know how long he was there? If he was playing a tennis tournament, I'm sure he was there for at least a week, but it was probably longer than that, but I don't recall right now. A few weeks, is that, I could imagine. Is that the best recollection as you sit here today? I'm sure if I was writing him letters, he had to be there for a long enough time to get the letters. All right, and so when he returned from Australia, you had moved to Birmingham, is that right? Could you restate that? When he returned from Australia, if he returned a few weeks after he went to the tournament in February, when he returned, you had moved to Birmingham, is that right? Or did you move there before he left? Well, I was writing him letters from Birmingham to him in Australia. I obviously was there before he went to Australia. And what letters are you referring to? Well, here's one right here that has the country club in Birmingham from Birmingham, Alabama on it. Ms. Towery says, may I approach, Your Honor? Court says yes. Are you referring to what's been marked as Exhibit 153? Mm-hmm. And that's a letterhead that says the Country Club of Birmingham. Yes. So you wrote him in Australia while you were living in Birmingham. Correct. And when he got back from Australia, did he visit you in Birmingham? Yes. Was he still living in the Princeton area when he returned from Australia? I don't recall. Do you recall that he wasn't living in Birmingham? He just came to Birmingham and, spent time with me, weekends or a week or whatever the time frame was. So he would visit you often while you were living in Birmingham, is that correct? Correct. How long did you live there in Birmingham? I lived there until December of the next year. Until December? I'm sorry, of that same year. Until December of about 10 months. All right, until December of 1987, is that right? Correct. Now, while you were in Birmingham, did you continue playing tennis? Well, I was training and playing tennis. I was also teaching tennis lessons as the assistant professional at the Birmingham Country Club. And were you playing in tennis in tenor in blah, blah, blah. Start that sentence over. Were you playing in tournaments as a tennis professional at that time? As well, yes. And did you, during the 1987 calendar year, did you play in any tournaments in Europe? In 1987, I believe I was employed most of the time full time at Birmingham at the country club. All right, so your answer is no, you didn't play in any tournaments. At this time, I don't think I did. I believe I went full time on the Women's Tennis Pro in the year of 88. Now, in the fall of 1987, is that when Lyle Menendez started school at Princeton? Yes, I believe so. And you were still in Birmingham at that time, correct? Yes, I was. And he continued to visit you in Birmingham when you started school, is that right? Mm-hmm. Several times. And did he fly to see you or drive to see you? I believe one time he drove because he drove my dog down so that I could have my dog down there. But I think he flew also. So both. All right. And what was your dog's name? Nike. Like the tennis shoe? Yes. You said he drove your dog down. Where was your dog when he drove it down? At my parents' home in Pennsylvania. What a nice boyfriend. And here she is being kind of a bitch on the stand. I mean, all the things that Lyle did for her, and here she is just like, whatever. Eh, I don't know if he called me every night. Seriously, girl? You've got like the boyfriend every girl dreams of. Well, aside from, what happened, but uh like he's flying all over the world to see you. He's doing these favors for you. He's buying you gifts and traveling and buying you cars and jewelry and bringing your dog down from Philly to Birmingham, driving it for you. Girl, you had everything with this man. I mean, granted, it was probably like, still like a high school love, whatever, but um they're adults now. They're out of high school. They're blooming adult relationships. And I guess, you don't realize what you have until it's gone sometimes. But it just seems like Lyle's doing all this nice stuff for you. What are you doing for him? Besides being unnecessarily uh kind of rude about it on the stand, some of the things that you're saying. I don't know. It just doesn't seem right to me. But at this time, I do believe that they're exes, right? At the time that she's testifying. Let me double check on that, but I'm pretty sure that they're exes by now. All right, I'm having hip pain, so I am turning my camera off, but I'm going to keep on reading for a little bit longer. Not much longer, but just letting you know this is going to be probably a shorter one. Just saying. All right, so where do we leave off? Oh yeah, Lyle's like the greatest boyfriend of all time. uh, Ms. Towery continues on. All right, so you were in Birmingham. Lyle is in Princeton, and your dog was in Pittsburgh. I believe so, yeah. So he picked up your dog and came down for you? And came down. And that was the only time that he ever drove down to see you, is that right? I believe so. Is Pittsburgh on the way to Birmingham from Princeton? Well, I don't know. I mean, obviously, you could cut across Pennsylvania and come down to Birmingham, but I really don't know how Lyle did it. Did he ask you to pick up your dog, or did he just do it? Objection, irrelevant, sustained. Miss Torrey says the remaining times that he visited you in Birmingham, did he fly down to see you? I'm assuming that he did. I don't know. Miss Nahara says, objection, motion to strike. Overruled, the answer will stand. You only recall him driving the one time when he brought your dog. At this time, yes. But he visited you many times when you were in Birmingham? I was only there for 10 months, so I'm sure he came down a couple times. And he was your only boyfriend at the time? Yes. And you were his only girlfriend at the time? Yes, we were engaged actually during part of that time. Okay, so are you sure that he only saw you a couple times during that 10 months? What are you saying? A couple too? I thought you just said, I'm sure he came down a couple times. I'm sure he came down more than once, if that's what you're asking. I don't recall if it was 5 times. I don't recall if it was 15 times. Do you recall that it was frequently? No, I don't. I don't know why. I don't know how many times it was. I don't believe it was every weekend, if that's what you're asking. But you were engaged, is that right? Yes. Did you go to Princeton to see him periodically during that time that you were living in Birmingham and he was in school at Princeton? When I could get off of work. Would you fly to see him in Princeton? When you would see him? Probably, yeah. Did he pay for those flights or did you? I don't remember. Oh, sure you do. Sure you do. You just don't want to say. Do you recall driving to Princeton to visit him during that time period? Objection, irrelevant, overruled. You can answer the question. The witness says, I don't recall at this time. No, it was about 10 years, a long time. Ms. Towery says, now you mentioned that Lyle Menendez, in your direct testimony, you mentioned that Lyle Menendez was suspended from Princeton during the 1988 calendar year. Is that right? That's correct, yes. And during that calendar year, you went to Europe with Lyle Menendez. Is that correct? I went, or he went with you, actually. Correct. I was on the women's professional tour full time, and I believe that was the year that Lyle came over for several weeks when I was playing over in Europe. Okay, so in 1988, you returned to the tour? Yes, full time, again, as a job. And part of your touring was in Europe? Yes, there's tennis tournaments over there. And Lyle went to Europe when you went when with sorry, Lyle went to Europe with you when you were flying or playing, is that right? Part of that time. And then he returned to the United States and you stayed in Europe. Is that what happened? I don't remember if I actually came back to these states and then I traveled all over the world playing again as a job. It was a full-time job for me, whether it was playing in Europe or South America or the United States, it was my job. So during that entire calendar year, did you have a home base or did you just travel from place to place? Well, I came back to Birmingham. I had a coach in Birmingham. I also had a coach in New Jersey. I had several different trainers that I was working with. I would go home to Pittsburgh sometimes, but I was pretty much on the road living out of a suitcase. All right. And during that period of time, you were still engaged to Lyle Menendez, is that right? Yes, I believe so. So did he visit you when you were touring at different places that you were playing tennis? Well, as I said, the time over in Europe, and I think he, came to tournaments if he could, if he was able to. I do distinctly remember one in New Jersey. My father was also there. And he would come to your tournaments when you had them in the United States if he could to see you, correct? Yeah, because again, you were engaged to see each other, right? Well, yeah. And when did you get engaged? I believe it was approximately could have been April or May, but I believe it was approximately April of 1987. You sure it wasn't the spring of the next year? I don't think so. I believe that I was in Birmingham at the time, although I do not remember exactly. I do remember, actually, it was in Birmingham because we got engaged at a French restaurant. Excuse me? There's no question pending. Oh, I'm sorry. Have you testified in the past that you were engaged from the spring of 1988 to the spring of 1989? I don't remember if I did or not. But you did testify in the prior trial in this matter, didn't you? Yes, I did. You also gave a statement under oath to the previous district attorneys handling this matter, Ms. Bazanich and Mr. Kuriyama, and Detective Zoller in 1992, didn't you? Yes. And that statement was taped, wasn't it? Yes, it was. So my question was, did you testify at the previous trial that you were engaged from the spring of 1988 to the spring of 1989 to Lyle Menendez? If I did testify to those dates, it was obviously inaccurate, and I am remembering that Lyle proposed to me in Birmingham, Alabama. Okay, so your testimony at the previous trial, may I approach Your Honor and show her? The court says, sure. Ms. Towery says, let me just show you a page from your testimony at the prior trial. Just ask you to look at the lines that are highlighted. Okay. Does it refresh your recollection as to what you testified to at the last trial, that you were engaged from the spring of 1988 to the spring of 1989? It does look like in that testimony that it was 88 to 89. So that was wrong, and it was April of 87 that you became engaged to Lyle Menendez. Is that right? Well, I do remember the exact place where Lyle proposed to me, and that was in Birmingham, Alabama, at a French restaurant. Okay. So, and that would have been in April of 87, correct? Yes, I believe so. And when he proposed to you at that time, did he surprise you with a ring? Yes, he did. And what did the ring look like? It was a diamond in the center with a couple stones on each side. And were you happy about that? I was very surprised, yes. My question was, were you happy? Objection, irrelevant, overruled. Yeah, I'm sure I was. Did you call your mother and tell her how happy you were after you became engaged and received the ring? Objection, irrelevant, sustained. Now, in 1989, Lyle Menendez turned 21. Is that right? I guess so. You don't remember? No. In 1989? Yes, in January. Do you remember his birthday? Yes, it is in January. And was he back at Princeton University at that time? In 89, yes, I think he was. Yes, he was. And where were you living at that time? I had finished playing the women's professional tennis tour in 1988 and had moved to the Princeton, or actually Lawrenceville area in New Jersey. And Lawrenceville is just adjacent to Princeton, is that right? Correct. Very close to Princeton University, correct? Yes. And you were still engaged to Lyle Menendez at that time, correct? Yes. And that Christmas before you returned to Lawrenceville to live, you were still playing on the tour. Is that right? And I was just finishing up at the end of the year. So you finished the tour, or your tour, the end of 1988? Yes. Did you spend any Christmases with your family and Lyle Menendez, if you can recall, during the time that you were either engaged to him or his girlfriend? I don't recall at this time. I'm sure we spent, time at around the holidays together, but I don't recall exactly. You don't recall Lyle Menendez going to your family's home in Pittsburgh for the Christmas holidays? I'm sure he was there. I just don't recall what year, since we went out for a very long time. Did he go to your family's home in Pittsburgh for the Christmas holidays on more than one occasion? I don't remember. And when you spent time at your family home in Pittsburgh for holidays, was it at your mother's house or your father's house? Both, actually. So your mother and father are separated or divorced, right? Correct. But they both live in the Pittsburgh area? Yes, they do. Did you also spend holidays or the Christmas holidays on some occasions at Terry and Carlos Beralt's home in New Jersey? Ms. Nahara says, I'm going to object, vague as to time. The court says, overruled. Ms. Towery says, during the time that you were, I'll clarify it, Your Honor, during the time that you were engaged to Lyle Menendez, or you were his girlfriend from 86 until you broke up in April of 1989, did you spend Christmas holidays on occasion at Terry and Carlos Beralt's in New Jersey? I do remember having one dinner, so I would say maybe a day or an afternoon there. I don't, again, remember exactly which year it was, no. And Terry and Carlos Beralt are Lyle Menendez's aunt and uncle, correct? Yes. And he was very close with them, wasn't he? Yes. And they also live in the area, which is very close to Princeton, is that right? Yes. And he spent a lot of time at their house when he was going to school at Princeton, didn't he? Mm-hmm. And when he was living in New Jersey and going to school in Trenton. Is that right? Correct. And you broke up with Lyle in April of 1989. Is that correct? Sometime in the spring of that year, yes. Have you said in the past that it was April? It could have been, yes. Okay, my question is, have you testified in the past that you broke up with him in April of 1989? Well, I don't have the testimony in front of me, but would you like to see it? That would be great. Thank you. So they show her the testimony. May I approach, Your Honor? Yes, let me show you a portion of your testimony at the previous trial and ask you to just read the highlighted portions. The witness does so and says, okay. Does that refresh your recollection that you testified at the prior trial that you broke up with Lyle Menendez in April of 1989? What it says is what it says in there is, I believe it was April. Okay. And you indicated earlier that you gave a statement under oath to the district attorneys in 1982, didn't you? 1982? Yes. Not to Ms. Bazanich. 1982? 92. Ms. Abramson uh, corrects. She says, oh, I'm sorry, 1992. In 92, you gave a statement under oath to Ms. Bazanich and Mr. Koriyama. Is that right? Yes. And in that statement, did you tell Ms. Bazanich and Mr. Koriyama that you broke up with Lyle Menendez in April of 1989? Well, if it says it in there, I obviously did. It was spring of 1989, just like it says in the testimony, and that I believed that it was April. Okay. So your recollection, is it better now or was it better then? Was it better when you spoke to Ms. Bazanich and Mr. Koriyama in 1992? Well, it was a very long time ago. It was around spring, sometime of that year. Okay, but at that time, you thought it was April in 1992, didn't you? I said I believed it was April, but I could not pinpoint it. May I approach again, Your Honor? Yes. Just this part? Yes. Does that refresh your recollection as to whether or not you told Ms. Bazanich and Mr. Kuriyama when you spoke to them in 1992 that you broke up with Lyle Menendez in April of 1989? Again, as it says in there, it says, I believe it was April. Okay, well, today, do you believe it's April? I don't remember. It was in the spring of that year. I can't be that specific. So you've forgotten because time has passed. Is that correct? It was a long time ago. But you knew at the time that you were talking to them under oath what your best recollection was, didn't you? Yes, I was trying to get as close as possible. At that time, you believed it was April. Is that correct? Objection. That misstates the evidence that it was about April. Overruled. How does that misstate the evidence? As I've stated in those testimonies, I believed it was about that time. And you said that you believed that it was April at that time. Ms. Nahara says, I'm going to object, misstates the testimony. The court says, okay, well, we've been through this. We've covered the territory. Let's move on to something else. Why did you break up with Lyle Menendez whenever it was that you broke up with him? There was a situation where I was employed at a restaurant, and this was one of the reasons, but I was employed at a restaurant in the Lawrenceville area, and I was also roommates with an individual by the name of Donovan Goudreau, and Donovan and I had just become roommates, and I had quite a bit of money that I had earned at the place where I was employed in my bedroom. And Lyle and I had come back one evening and that money was gone, and Lyle didn't take the money. So I thought that it was probably a pretty good chance that Donovan had taken it, and not knowing him that well, I did not feel comfortable continuing with him as a roommate. So I asked him to leave, which he did. But then Lyle did not believe that Donovan would take this money and that should not accuse him of it. So I pretty much said, okay, then why don't you take Donovan in and you guys be friends and that's it. And so I pretty much broke up with him and that was one of the reasons. But that was why Donovan left and then Donovan went and I believe stayed with Lyle. Okay, where was Lyle living at that time? In the dorms at Princeton. And how did you know Donovan Goudreau? Donovan and I, objection, irrelevant, overruled. Donovan and I met at a restaurant where we both worked. And do you remember the name of that restaurant? That one was TGI Fridays. And after you met Donovan, you moved in with him? Yes, both of us were looking for roommates at the time and a place to live, and we had found a place in the Princeton area. Now, after you came back and your money was missing and you thought that Donovan had stolen it from you, you kicked him out. Is that correct? Pretty much so. I asked him to leave. And how long had you lived with him before that happened? A very short period of time. A month? A week? Probably several weeks, because I remember I had to pay his part of the rent as well because that had not been paid yet either. And did Lyle meet Donovan Goudreau through you? I believe so, yes. So you introduced them? Yes. And they became good friends, I take it? I think so. And when you felt that Donovan had stolen from you, you said that Lyle didn't believe that Donovan would do something like that. Correct. So you told Lyle that you were going to break up with him? Well, it was, as again, that was not the only reason, but that was pretty much the last straw. And I just said, I don't want to have anything to do with Donovan. And if you're going to be going to befriend Donovan, I would prefer not to continue our relationship either. All right. And then Donovan went to stay with Lyle at his dorm room. Is that right? I think so. Again, at that point, I'm pretty much, we were friendly. We did remain friendly, but I didn't see him a lot. You didn't see Donovan a lot or Lyle a lot? Donovan. So I don't know. So did you and Donovan remain friendly after you accused him of stealing from you and you kicked him out? No. So you didn't remain friendly with Donovan? No. Did you remain friendly with Lyle? Yes. Do you know if Donovan Goudreau took a trip to California with Lyle at some point, either before or after you broke up with Lyle Menendez? If he did, I don't remember when it was. Or do you remember that a trip was taken? Ms. Nahara says, I'm going to object. Calls for hearsay. The court says, sustained. Ms. Towery says, did Lyle Menendez tell you that Donovan Goudreau took a trip with him to California at any time, either before or after you broke up with Lyle? Objection would call for hearsay. Sustained. You ultimately learned that it turned out you were right and Donovan Goudreau was dishonest. Is that right? Yes. And so did Lyle. And so did Lyle. Is that right? Yes. And Lyle was hurt and upset when he discovered that. Is that correct? I believe so, yes. And you've described Donovan Goudreau as a con man, haven't you? Yeah. And that's your opinion of him. Is that right? Yes, it is. Now, after the deaths of Lyle's parents, you said you called him? Yes. And you had been broken up with him from April of the spring of 1989 until that telephone call. Is that right? We had been broken up, but we had seen each other that summer. We had even talked about playing a tennis tournament that weekend in Vermont, was which I was trying to arrange for him with his mother. But we had seen each other and talked and remained friendly and that type of thing. All right. My question was, were you broken up with Lyle Menendez from the time in April or the spring of 89 until that telephone call when you called him after the death of his parents? Ms. Nahara says, I'm going to object vague as to what is meant by broken up. You don't know what broken up means? Court says, why don't you clarify? Ms. Tari says, sure. Until April or the spring of 1989, you were engaged to Lyle Menendez, were you not? Yes. And did you give him his ring back when you kicked Donovan out and broke up with him? Yeah. And you became unengaged in your mind, didn't you? Yes. And the same in Lyle's mind, as best you could determine. Is that right? Correct. And you didn't get that ring back between the time that you returned it to him and broke off the engagement until you called him after his parents died. Is that correct? Between those two periods of time when you gave it back to him in the spring of '89 and the time that you telephoned him after his parents' deaths, did you get that ring back? Oh, no. Did you become re engaged to him? No. So you were broken up. We saw each other. You were dating? We dated each other and other people. And you were living in New Jersey, and Lyle was living in where during that period of time? It would have been '89, so I believe during the summer anyway, he was in California. Because he wasn't in school at Princeton during that time period, is that right? During the summer, correct. So he was living in California after he finished this semester at or fall of, or excuse me, the spring of 1989 semester in New Jersey. Is that right? Correct. And what you're saying is he returned during the summer to date you even though you had broken off your engagement. Is that right? Well, I believe he was still in school probably through June. I'm not sure exactly when the semester ends at Princeton, but I know that we did see each other occasionally up until then, and I do remember him coming into the restaurant at Princeton where I worked at that time, Casa Lupita, to see me. All right. Let me just try to understand. He was in school until June, approximately, and you returned the ring and kicked Donovan out around April in that time period. Is that right? Correct. And did you continue to date him between the time that you returned the ring and June when he completed school? Well, we saw each other. I don't remember exactly. It was very casual, but we did see each other. So you wouldn't call it formal dating, but you weren't angry. Is that fair? And that's very fair. And when he returned to Los Angeles in the summer, was your relationship the same? You weren't formally dating, but you weren't angry, is that right? And when we talked, and like I said, I was trying to rearrange a tennis tournament, and we were both kind of hoping that it would be that weekend that we both might get back together again. And this arrangement, you were trying to arrange a tennis tournament, is that the primary contact that you remember between you and Lyle Menendez during that summer when he was living in Los Angeles and you were living in New Jersey and you were no longer engaged? No, it wasn't just because of the tennis tournament. No, no, is that the primary contact that you recall? You keep mentioning it. Is that the primary contact that you recall having with Lyle Menendez during that time period that you were broken up and he was living in Los Angeles? You mean telephone calls? No. Is that when you're asking? I'm sorry, I don't understand what you mean by primary contact. Well, you said that you were dating, and then you said that you're not dating. Is that right? Well, we saw each other. If you would like to call that dating, I mean, we did see each other. We went out to dinner. But we were also seeing each other or seeing other people. All right. And I'm trying to pin down the time frame that you were dating him. And you indicated that you saw each other during the time he was still in school, after you broke up with him. But then he left to come to Los Angeles, correct? I believe so, yes. Did he fly back or drive back to New Jersey to date you during that summer? Well, I'm sure he didn't drive back, but he may have flown back. To date you? I don't know if it probably wasn't just to see me. He had friends and family and everybody else in the area as well. And how many times did he come to New Jersey during that summer and go out on a date with you? I don't know. Was it once? I don't remember. Was it twice? I don't remember. Do you recall a single time when you went somewhere with Lyle Menendez during that summer? I don't remember specifics. Like I said, Lyle was in Los Angeles working for his father at the time. You did call him as soon as you found out that his parents had uh, lost their lives, correct? Yes, I did. And then you saw him at the memorial service in Princeton, is that right? Yes, well, I saw him actually the night before the memorial service. Is that the first time that you two had or that you had seen him since you were dating him in the summer or not dating him in the summer? It had been a while. And the night before the memorial service, you and your mother and Lyle Menendez had dinner together, is that correct? Yes, we did. And then you spent that night with him, is that right? Yes, I stayed there. When you say you stayed there, you spent the night with him, the entire night, is that correct? Yes. At a hotel with him? Yes. And it was just you and Lyle, is that right? Yes. When you had dinner, when you had dinner with you and your mother and Lyle, was anyone else present? No, just the three of us. And what was his emotional condition when you had dinner, the three of you? He was actually kind of joking, a little lighthearted. So he was okay at dinner? Mm-hmm. And what about when you left dinner and went back to the room with him? At some point, he did become upset. Did he cry? For a period of time, yes. Did he cry a lot? Yes. It wasn't all night long, but he did for a period of time. And would you describe that as a difficult night? Mm-hmm. Yes. Is that a yes? Yes. Do you remember telling your mother afterwards that that night was the hardest night of your life because of having to take care of Lyle and how he felt? Objection calls for hearsay. Sustained. Did you tell your mother that? Objection calls for hearsay. Sustained. Was that night the hardest of your life because of having to take care of Lyle and how he felt? I wouldn't say that it was the hardest night of my life. It was a difficult night. I had never been in a situation like that. Do you remember him taking off a gold watch that he was wearing and throwing it across the room? I was asked in my last testimony, and no, I didn't remember that. Do you remember telling your mother that that had happened? No, I don't. You just don't recall it, as you sit here today, whether or not it happened. Is that correct? Correct. And you may not have told your mother that it happened. Is that right? I don't remember. It was a very emotional night. There was a lot of crying going on. She does not seem open or legitimately like trying to remember anything. She just, yeah, she's a very difficult witness. She's a I don't recall, I don't remember type of witness. Is that the reason that you don't remember very well? Because it was a very emotional night? It was a very long time ago. Okay, now you indicated that you saw Lyle Menendez for a period of time in New Jersey before moving to California. Is that correct? Yes. After the funeral? Yes. And yes. And you said that he was riding in a bulletproof limousine. Is that right? That's what he told me that it was. And when did he tell you that? Obviously, the first time I got in it, I was surprised that there was even a limousine there. I was obviously not used to being ridden around in a limousine and did not feel comfortable with it, and especially when he told me it was bulletproof. And I'm like, why does it need to be bulletproof? So, and you remember him telling you that it was bulletproof now 6 years later, is that right? Well, I remembered it was being bulletproof limousine, yes. And you have a specific recollection of him saying that, is that right? Yes. And you've never said that before, have you? That this was a bulletproof limousine that you were riding in. I guess I was never asked, but yeah, it was bulletproof, and that's why there was bodyguards and the whole mob and mafia, and that's why he needed a bulletproof limousine. I don't buy this chick's story one bit. I mean, I just feel like she's regurgitating the prosecution's points, and I think that they got to her. I don't know. I really do. Or at least coached her enough to the point where she's just a bad witness for the defense, even though she should have some loyalty to Lyle, you would think, but I guess no. So you know that Lyle Menendez only had bodyguards for a total period of 8 days, is that right? I don't know what the exact time frame was. And you mentioned that he bought a Porsche during that time period as well, is that right? Uh-huh, yes. And to your knowledge, he only bought a Porsche, is that right? Yes. And he didn't buy a whole fleet of them with various different people, did he? Not that I'm aware of, no. Now, you mentioned the mafia comment. Uh-huh. Is your memory better now of what Lyle told you? Let me back up. Lyle said something the night that you spent with him, that emotional, difficult night, about the mafia. Is that correct? Well, he was attributing either the mob or the mafia as being those that had taken his parents' lives. Okay, and you remember that distinctly as you sit here today. Is that correct? I don't remember if he said mob or mafia, but one of the two, yes. Yeah, he said one of those two. I believe so, yes. And he also said something about an industry that rhymes with corn ties to live entertainment. Is that right? Well, he attributed that it was a business dealing, that these people were after his father due to some business dealings, that they were mob or mafia related. Okay. You said your direct testimony that there was something about porn, that word again that rhymes with corn, ties to live entertainment. Yes. And is this something that Lyle Menendez told you that night, or is this something that you've subsequently learned from publicity in this case? No, Lyle told me that's why, I couldn't understand why there was mob or mafia ties, and Lyle explained that as being, because of rhymes with corn. You mean he told you all these things? Lyle talked a lot that night, yes. And you remember all these things as you are testifying here today. Correct. Yes, I do. But you can't remember whether he flew back or how many times he flew back to date you the summer before. Is that right? Objection, argumentative. How's that argumentative? Sustained. When you talked to Ms. Bazanich and Mr. Kuriyama in 1992, and gave them the statement under oath, was there a reporter, or there was a reporter there, wasn't there? Yes, there was. There was also a tape recorder. Is that right? Correct. And that statement that you gave them was transcribed, wasn't it? I believe so. By the way, at the time that you spent the night with Lyle Menendez in Princeton, the night before the memorial service, there had been publicity on television and in the papers speculating that Mr. and Mrs. Menendez's homicides were mob or mafia related. Hadn't there been? I don't know. I remember only that Lyle told me. So you don't remember seeing anything on television about that? No, I don't. And you don't remember reading anything in the papers about it. I remember what Lyle told me. In your taped statement in 1992, did you say that what Lyle told you during that emotional night was that he made it known or made it sound like it was the mafia, or that's what I was believing at the time? That it was somebody after his father. Is that what you said in 1992? Well, what I said was yes, and that's what Lyle had me believe. Okay. Did you say what I just read? Yes, obviously. And that's what you were believing at the time. Right. And that's what Lyle had told me, and that's what I believed it. Okay. And when you were asked why you believed that someone was after his father, you said business reasons. I don't know. Was that what you told them? I obviously did. But now you recall that there was a discussion about that word that rhymes with corn ties of live entertainment. Is that right? Well, yes. And that's because you searched your memory and can remember all those things that you didn't recall in 1992. Is that correct? Well, a lot of these things that you asked me back then, I had no time to think about, and I've had a lot of time to think about them since. I've never asked you anything before. Well, since I've been asked these questions. I've never met you before, have I? I'm sorry, I did not mean you. I meant since I was asked those questions, that was the first time. So other people have asked you the same questions, correct? No, I mean just those questions under oath I was asked. All right, and that was your answer under oath, wasn't it? Correct. And you also indicated that it was difficult for you to remember what happened that night because it was so emotional, didn't you? Yes. But now you can remember. Objection, argumentative. Overruled. Ms. Towery says, I'll withdraw. The court says, let's take our recess now and we'll resume at 10 minutes to the hour. The following proceedings were held in court outside the presence of the jury. And I'm not sure if I'm going to stop here or keep going. Let me see how much is left on this argument before we get into uh, coming back from the break. Hold on one sec. All right, it's not too long, hopefully. I'm hurting, but I'm going to try to do a little bit of argument here. All right, so the court says we're back in session without the jury. Is there something you wanted to talk about? Ms. Nahara says, yes, Your Honor. During her cross-examination, Ms. Towery elicited information concerning the defendant Lyle Menendez's demeanor after the funeral that evening, and I believe also at the Nassau Inn. And I have a photograph which I'm planning to use as an exhibit with this witness. Sorry, hold on, I just bumped my mic. Um, Planning to use with this witness on redirect to go further. Photograph. She wants to use a photograph with this witness on redirect to go further into that issue which she opened up, which I've shown to counsel for the defense. Counsel for Lyle Menendez said it was fine. So Ms. Aronson says, Terry said it was fine. Ms. Towery says, I think that. Ms. Nahara says, in any event, she didn't even let her finish. In any event, I believe the defense for Erik Menendez because he's depicted in this photograph has something to say about it. I'd like to show it to the court right now. Mr. Levin says we would ask that it not be shown for the photographer in the back of the room to take a picture of, Your Honor. The court says, okay. Ms. Towery says, I'd like to be heard also, Your Honor. Apparently, Ms. Nahara showed it to Mr. Gessler, and I didn't really discuss it with her, and it seems to me that her reason for presenting that picture is that I elicited evidence of his demeanor during this memorial service, and I don't believe that I did. I think it was the night before, and I think that her testimony was that he was fine and seemed happy and joking at dinner with her and her mother. It was only when he was alone with her in her hotel room that he was emotional and crying. So I don't think that that picture is inconsistent with anything I elicited from the witness. Court says, when or how are you going to authenticate this photograph? Ms. Nahara says, Your Honor, I have spoken to Ms. Pisarcik and I have shown her this photograph and she said, yes, that does, in fact, depict them at the time of the memorial service. Court says, how does she know that? Ms. Nahara says, because she was there. The court says, she was there when the picture was taken? Ms. Nahara says she was there at the precise moment that the photo was snapped when she was present during the time that the party took place, and she can testify viewing that picture, she recalls exactly what their demeanor was. She can't remember anything else, but she can remember them in a moment when they're getting their picture taken? I'm sorry, what? That makes no sense. But okay, let's keep going. The court says that's still not authenticating this picture as to this is an example of perhaps how she would describe them. Ms. Nahara says, right. The court says, unless she was there when the picture was taken, or she can say which is the exact clothing that they were wearing that night, which is kind of unlikely that she would remember the exact clothing they wore that night, you're saying that she can authenticate this photograph in the extent of saying that this is an actual photograph that was taken that night. Ms. Nahara says, Your Honor, she can authenticate that it was their demeanor that night and that, I guess, with me, I don't understand what the court is saying. The court says, I don't understand what you're offering it, or why you're offering it. Ms. Nahara says, it's an example of the defendant, Lyle Menendez's demeanor on the night of the memorial service. Ms. Abramson says, Your Honor, court says, wait, one person talk. This is not how she saw them that night. This is just, she didn't see them when this picture was taken, says no, that was the court. Ms. Nahara says, she saw them that night. The court says, listen to me. She didn't see them when this picture was taken. Is that clear? Is that true? Ms. Nahara says, at the precise moment somebody snapped the shot. The court says, yes. Is that right? She says, that's my understanding. The court says, and all she can say is this is an example of how they looked that night, nothing more. Ms. Nahara says, that is correct, Your Honor. What you stated. The court says, just as though someone had taken a picture of them some other time or had a picture of them some other time showing their demeanor, laughing or whatever they were doing, that would be how she would describe them. Another picture showing an example of how they looked. Ms. Nahara says she would be more probative because she can say that this was the night of the memorial service. Court says, what was the night? The photo, the Ms. Nahara says when the photo was taken. Court says, how does she know? Ms. Nahara says because it's at the Nassau Inn, and that's how they looked at the night, or that's how they looked that night, and she was there that night. Court says, that's the clothing. She can say that is the clothing that they wore that night. This is impossibly unrealistic. There's no way that she can say, yeah, that's what they wore. What? That's not how you authenticate a photo. But anyways, Ms. Nahara says, I don't think she can be that specific, but when we talk about when someone takes a photo of the crime scene, the court says we're talking about her. We're not talking about the scene of a crime. This isn't very complex. I don't know why you're so confused about it. She either can or cannot say this is a picture taken that night, and I don't think she can from what you're telling me. All you're saying is this is an example of how they looked at a certain time when they're happy, they're smiling. Is that basically what this picture represents? Ms. Nahara says, why don't we get her in here? And the court says, no, I'll just ask you. Ms. Nahara says, I asked her if this is how they looked. Actually, I think what I said was, is this them on the night of the memorial service? And she said yes. Court says, and what does that prove? Ms. Nahara says, does this depict what their demeanor was? And she said yes. Court says, again, you're not really answering my question. Is this an example of how they looked? Not that this is a photograph of them that she can authenticate as taken that night. This is just a photograph that was taken sometime, and she would say this is the type of of demeanor that they displayed that night. Do you understand the difference between the two? Ms. Nahara says, I do understand, but I guess I'm not making it clear. She can testify that she recalls what they looked like that night and where they were that night and what the place looked like that night. She was there and she believes this depicts them that night at the Nassau Inn. The court says, this is the demeanor she saw them display that night. Correct. Ms. Abramson says there was no night. The memorial service was in the morning and the afternoon. Ms. Nahara says that day. Ms. Abramson continues. The night she's talking about is the day before. She goes out to dinner with Lyle and with her mother. The memorial service and the family is here. This isn't a mystery. The memorial service was in the morning. There was a daytime reception. There is no night at all. Those photographs, small versions of them, were provided to the defense claiming to come from Brian Anderson. We don't know who took them. We don't know whether there are any photographs of the people have not that the people have not shown the court of the other members of the family laughing and smiling and hugging each other, including Brian Anderson, supposedly at the time of the event, which isn't at night at all. It's further confusion to mislead the jury. And with respect to my client, his demeanor is not at issue with the witness at this point. We would object to her testifying about this unless she can say what she said the minute the camera was snapped. Who cracked a joke? Who told them to look smiley or not, or to compare it to the demeanor of the rest of the family? It's an unauthenticated photograph. Who also were smiling. Other members of the family were also smiling. So it's not just an irrelevant cheap shot. The fact that someone smiles at a funeral doesn't mean anything. Ms. Nahara says, Your Honor. The court says yes. It is probative of his demeanor after the memorial service, and she will say she was there at the Nassau Inn after the memorial service. That's a fact that I believe has already been established. And she has looked at the photo and says that depicts them after the memorial service at the Nassau Inn, and that depicts specifically Lyle Menendez's demeanor at the time. Ms. Abramson says that point isn't even at issue. The only thing is she's talking about is the night before. The court says, first of all, it seems that how long is her examination going to be on cross? Ms. Towery says, how much further? Yes. It's not going very quickly. I think about an hour, but I can't be certain. The court says, okay. We'll wait and see if we get to that point where the people want to ask this witness how she can authenticate this particular photograph, and we'll let that be done outside the presence of the jury. And if there is some relevance to it being used, the photograph can be cut in half so that only Lyle Menendez is depicted on it if it has any relevance. At this point, there's been nothing raised as far as the demeanor of the co-defendant, so objections by him can be dealt with just by removing him from the photograph. So anything else now at this point before we start up? Ms. Towery says, just another example of a failure of discovery, Your Honor. Another one. Another one. The testimony that I've been asking Ms. Pisarcik about regarding the industry ties of live entertainment was first known to me when she testified here today. It's not in any police report. It's not in any of her statements. It's not in any of her testimony. It just popped right out. The court says she said that yesterday. Ms. Towery said, I'm sorry? Court says that was in her testimony yesterday. Ms. Towery says, I'm sorry, yesterday, but the point is that there was no discovery provided with respect to aspects of her testimony and never has been. Ms. Abramson says, there's other things, Terry. She goes on that, Ms. Towery goes on, that's what I'm concerned about right now. The court says, and what did you want me to do? Ms. Towery says, I'd like for you to strike all of her direct testimony, but I suppose that would be the ultimate sanction. And perhaps you could strike that portion of her testimony and instruct the jury that that's new information for which no discovery has been provided, that the witness has never said before, and they're not to consider it. The court says, and what is the people's response? Ms. Nahara says, Your Honor, she's always maintained that that he gave her these statements about the mob or the mafia. She remembers things, she says them, and that's her testimony. The court says that's not the issue of discovery. The issue is whether or not you knew about it before you put her on the witness stand. This is what she was going to say. Ms. Nahara says, Your Honor, I have a statement from her about the mob or the mafia and it being related to business. And I cannot honestly say that she told me the corn industry specifically before. The court says, You said you have a statement. Ms. Nahara says, It's a statement taken from the previous. The court says, That was given to the defense? No, Your Honor, says Ms. Nahara. When I spoke to her, we discussed the statement that she made previously. So it wasn't given to the defense. Court says, Well, did she mention this in the discussions? Ms. Nahara says, She mentioned, I was taking notes at the time, and what I wrote down is it was business related and connections to Live and the mob and mafia, and I didn't write down the word rhymes with corn, but That doesn't mean that she didn't say it. I don't want to say that. Obviously, I didn't think it was different from anything I have heard before. You are such a liar. Ms. Towery says, I'm sorry, are these notes from the October 12th conversation or subsequently? Ms. Nahara says, this is when I was talking to her about, I've spoken to her a lot. The October 12th would be the last interview. Ms. Towery says, yes. Court says, these are notes that you gave to the defense. Is that right? Ms. Towery says, I think she indicated that she had no notes, Your Honor. She told me she destroyed the notes, and the half-page typed document was a verbatim copy of the notes that she took in that interview. Therefore, after we got Detective Zoller's 14 pages of notes and 5-page police report, Ms. Nahara says, that's correct, Your Honor. My notes I'm talking about, things I write to myself for when I'm going to be examine the witness about. And I don't believe that's discoverable. The court says only if it's based upon interviews that you've conducted with the witness that reflect different statements that she said before. Ms. Nahara says correct, and I didn't recall anything different, Your Honor, and I don't really know if it is all that different. In any event, the court cuts her off and says, so you're saying you don't recall her making that statement before, is that right? Ms. Nahara says, I don't recall her actually mentioning the rhymes with corn industry. If she said it, I didn't note it. If Detective Zoller noted it, then he noted it. Okay. I think you're a lying liar who lies, but cool. See these discovery games that they keep playing? Like, why? If you have a good case, why do you keep playing discovery games? It doesn't make sense. Ms. Towery says, perhaps we could look at the record, Your Honor, because my recollection of the manner in which the question was asked was that Ms. Nahara asked a leading question regarding the industry, which was objected to. Perhaps my recollection is wrong. She is absolutely right, and I'm glad she brought that up because she asked the leading question, it was sustained, and then she asked it in a non-leading way, and the witness responded with exactly the leading answer that she had asked in the previous question. So I'm glad she brought that up. The court says, why don't you look at the record before we get to any further discussion on this so we're not wasting any more time at this point. You find it in the record. At this point, the DA says that we didn't, or she didn't recall that being said. So if you can find something in the record that would indicate otherwise, we can look at it again. Ms. Towery says, I think that the testimony was elicited yesterday, so perhaps I could ask the reporter to locate the portion during the break, since I don't think we have the transcript yet. Court says we'll see when the transcript is due. Ms. Nahara says, in all honesty, as I recall the statements that were made, I may very well have brought it up, but I don't know that she told me is the problem, and that's what I'm very concerned about, saying something that impeaches her that isn't true. I had all of these different notes on different people who had discussed that particular subject, and in asking her about it, I know I asked her what it was that she recalled. I remember when she told me it sounded very familiar to what she had said, and basically told myself it was the same statement and went on from there. I had a checklist about anything said by anybody about the issue, so we just asked, and Ms. Abramson says, a shot in the dark question. Ms. Nahir says, no, it was related to that one issue. I had a good faith basis or a good faith belief that everything I asked her about came from her. But I don't have a separate note or a separate recollection that she told me that about this. That's what I'm so concerned about, saying something that turns out to be dead wrong. The court says you should be just as concerned in the future about turning over to the defense anything that is remotely different than what was said before, so we don't have a controversy such as this. These are his, yeah, this is his version of yelling at the prosecution. You should be better at doing this so we don't have this happen. That's his telling the prosecution you better behave. Um, yeah, so anywho, uh, I lost my spot. You should be more concerned in the future about turning over to the defense anything that is remotely different that was said before so we don't have a controversy such as this, and motions to strike testimony or instruct the jury that you have withheld discovery. So rather than being concerned about impeaching the witness, be more concerned about turning over discovery so we don't have time consuming events such as this that are non productive and debates over whether something is significant or not. You understand what I just said? That's like the harshest he's ever been with the prosecution. She says, I understand what you just said, Your Honor. The court says, all right, and if counsel want to explore further the transcript, how the testimony came out, you can do that and bring it to my attention. Ms. Towery says, thank you, Your Honor. The court says, anything else before we have the jury come out? Ms. Towery says, I don't think so. The court says, let's get the jury out. And that is where I'm going to stop, you guys. And we will continue later in the week with a continuation of Jamie's testimony. And again, this is going to be in multiple parts. So this is part 1, and we will continue on Friday. So thank you guys so much for watching. And please hit the like button on your way out. Take care. Bye now.